Good evening, everyone. This is a shiur on Seder, so we have to start punctually. But thank you so much for being with me. And thank you to Yeshiva University, to Rab Shur for arranging and organizing this. Greatly appreciative of the opportunity to learn Torah together with you through this format and through the privilege of any other. So our topic tonight is how to find Seder, live with Seder in a time that feels entirely like nothing is Beseder. Our lives have been turned upside down. Our lives have been turned utterly backwards. In the best of circumstances, if everyone is, please get healthy in your home, it's still a very awkward and difficult time to be living, in which our routines that we have set and that we've come to anticipate, to live by, to predict, are entirely unpredictable. There's no day that's the same as the one before. Many are working from home, balancing it with homeschooling their children. Many are trying to figure out how to balance their worry and concern about the future with the very real obligations and responsibilities in the present, how to put it all together and live with a sense of calm and serenity, to live with Seder in a time where nothing feels like it is the Seder. And that is our topic for tonight. And I thank you again for joining me. And I want to propose that perhaps we can find chizuk, we could find both support and strength, we could find direction through Pesach, through the Seder night itself, what that night is really all about. I'm going to dedicate this shiur, our learning together tonight, in memory of Nishmas Reb Chaim Meir ben Mordechai. The Seder is a very unusual gathering. We come together Pesach night here in Chutz La'aretz. We do it 2 nights in a row, and we come together and we have a very peculiar evening, a very peculiar way of celebrating freedom. Pesach is all about liberty. Pesach is all about freedom. Normally, people are set free from whatever bondage, responsibility, obligation that they have. And how do they mark it? Not with discipline, not with order, not by being organized and by being highly regimented and regulated, but exactly the opposite. Thank God, Florida finally, spring break was canceled. But on university campuses, finals being over often leads to utter pandemonium. Freedom is celebrated by having no rules and no boundaries. And yet here we do the exact opposite. Pesach comes and we mark the experience of freedom. How? By sitting down around a table that is so perfectly set and highly organized. A table which took days, if not weeks, if not months, maybe not this year, to prepare for and get ready. And what do we sit down to? We sit down to an agenda that's sitting in front of each and every one of us. All of our Siddharim universally begin by singing the Simanim, the order of the evening, Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, and so on. Could you imagine? This is how you celebrate freedom, by reading an agenda. We're singing a song, new business, old business. We're approving the minutes. We're beginning our evening of celebration of freedom by being so regulated, regimented, by reading an agenda, and by having to follow an exact order. How is that freedom? Freedom is take the night off. You have no rules. You have no boundaries. Do what you want, when you want, how you want. That should be freedom. And yet we see through our experience collectively on Pesach that in fact it is exactly the opposite. And I think there are incredible lessons for us to take from here to apply to the unusual circumstance in which we find ourselves right now. That the more order and the more discipline and the more regimented we are, the more freedom we can find. And so even though we feel so confined, restricted within our homes, we are slaves and we are prisoners to this virus which is forcing us all to live in retreat, to distance from one another, to be confined in our homes as if they are jails. We feel everything but free. Freedom is the ability to gather in shul, to gather in the Beis Medrash. Freedom is the ability to go to the supermarket. Freedom is the ability even to go to work. Those freedoms have been taken from us. And with it, so much of our routine, so much of our calendar and our schedule. So many people are so frazzled. We're out of sorts. We're not sure what to do with ourselves, and therefore we're not living the best version of ourselves. We're not ending each day feeling accomplished and feeling that we're achieving. We're not ending each day feeling as if we lived it for its fullest. We need to go back to finding Seder even in a time where we have no Seder. That's the journey we're going to go on together tonight. If you're watching on the YouTube live stream of YU, then you saw on the YU Live website, there are source sheets you can follow. If you're watching on Facebook Live, I don't have the source sheets, but if you go to yutorah.org/live, you'll find the source sheets there. Feel free to follow inside. We're going to read very little inside. And for full transparency and disclosure, this was the topic of my Shabbos Hagadol Drasha last year, but I think it's so relevant. And that's why I'm so eager to share it with you together this year. We'll try to move through it at a much quicker pace than we did our last Shabbos Haggadah. So source number one, if you are looking inside, is the text with which we are familiar. We all open our Haggadah with that song, whatever version of the song that you sing. Universally, we all begin, Kadesh Urchatz. Undoubtedly, you've seen the cute meme that's gone around. Kadesh Urchatz, Mara Urchatz, Korech Urchatz, Karpas Yachat. Everything is Urchatz this year. You have to wash your hands between each thing, not only once, not only twice. But we know it's Kadesh Urchatz, Karpas Yachatz, Magid Rachza, and so on and so forth. Where did this come from? Where did we get this list? Where did we develop the custom to read or sing this list as the way to launch or begin our Seder? Why is that so important? And what role does Seder have in the whole evening and experience of what freedom are really all about? So very quickly, the most popular order that we have, that we follow for this formula, the Kadesh Urchatz, comes from the Machzor Vitri in the name of the famous Rashi. Others bring it in the name of one of the Balei HaTosfos, Rabbeinu Shmuel. The Machzor Vitri brings a different from Yossi Haggadah. We have different versions of it, even though universally we seem to have adopted the same one in our version of the Haggadah, but there are these different versions. The Abarbanel has his own version, the Trumas Hadeshin has his own version, the Maharam Yerutenberg, the last of the Balei Tosfos, has a beautiful poem that he wrote to capture this order that we're going to recite that night. The Trumas Hadeshin of Yisrael Isserlin, in fact, signed his name. He lived in the 15th century in Germany, and he wrote a different list, not the one that we are accustomed to say, and he used the acrostic in order to spell his name, Yisrael. The Maharshal also has his own list with an introduction in which he used an acrostic to sign his name to it. The question is why? Why are we launching this meaningful, moving night? Why are we launching this experience by singing the agenda? By singing the agenda. President's report, rabbi's report, old business, new business. Anybody have good and welfare these days? Why are we starting that way? So many answers are suggested. The first is the Sefer HaPardes himself, Rashi. And Rashi says, you know why? Because there's a lot to do tonight. When you sit down at the Seder, there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of mitzvahs and a lot of minutiae. And we want to make sure to get it right. And so it's very important to keep a checklist. If you have a checklist, you can ensure you get it right. I read a book several years ago. I forgot by the name of which prominent physician. And the name of the book was Checklist. And there's all kinds of research, statistics, data, particularly important in our time, but hospitals, which require the employees, doctors, nurses, medical staff, custodians, to all use a checklist for everything, minimized and eliminated so many of the careless errors and mistakes that had happened. And therefore, this book concludes, doesn't matter how smart, how sophisticated you are, doesn't matter how well trained in whatever area of proficiency you're proud to have, if you employ and engage with a checklist, you're going to eliminate mistakes, you're going to get more things right. Says Rashi, that's why we lay out the night, the Haggadah begins with a simple checklist to ensure that we get everything right. There are too many things at stake. There are too many things that are important. On page 5, source 7, the Maharshal of Shlomo, 16th century Poland, gives us a different reason. He says, we start with the song because it's joyful, and we want to begin the night in an uplifting way, so we're so excited. We gather together to celebrate freedom, we sing Kadesh Urchatz, we get everybody started, and we very clear expectations. Here's what the night has in store for us. Here are the steps that we need to take. This is the journey, this is the ladder that we need to climb. Don't fall asleep, don't doze off, don't get distracted. But it gives us a sense of what we're doing so that we can be sure to get it right. That is the reason of the Mahal, reason number 2. I saw a beautiful reason in the very nice Haggadah of Rabbeinu Ginsburg called From Mitzrayim to Moshiach. And there he talks about, it's striking that we begin the Seder with the minhag to recite the Simanim, the names of the 15 parts of the Seder. The list of these particular names is not found in the Gemara. It's attributed at least as far back as Rashi. And as we start the Seder, we begin retelling the story of the birth of the Jewish people. We emphasize the concept of the Mesorah by starting specifically with a minhag. Part of our tradition, part of the forming of our family and our nation is that we are bound by a collective Mesorah. We have a tradition. We're part of a covenantal community. We're bound by certain behaviors and lifestyle. And so even though this isn't found in the Gemara, we nevertheless launch the Seder night with something that specifically does not trace itself back, does not root itself in the Gemara, to show us the importance of our Mesorah, even the rabbinically introduced ideas, customs, and practices that later. In the Haggadah of Moshe Yehuda Katz, who was a contemporary, lived in the 20th century, he gives another very interesting reason. He says, Ein Kedusha B'li Hachana. There is no holiness without preparation. This is a holy night, the Seder night. So much work has gone into it. And as much as the crystal, the china, the silverware matter, as much as the delicacies, they matter, as much as the arts and crafts projects the kids come home with in ordinary years matter, what matters is it's a night of holiness. It's a transformational night. It's a night in which we renew our sense of faith, emunah in Hashem, we see His guiding hand in our lives. And if we want to achieve that transformation that the night has in store, then we need to prepare. There is no he writes, it requires preparation. He then quotes the Magen Avram, Avram Gambino, who says this is the reason that when we bench with a zimun, we introduce it with Havlan v'nevarech. Ki kol hani de kedusha boy hazmana. Umizeno agim b'lashon Ashkenaz or Rabos Samir Velen benchen. He says we say in our vernacular Yiddish at the time, we invite people to come bench with us. Something that is holy requires an invitation. It requires preparation. In fact, it's our parsha spoke about this morning in our parsha class. Vayikra, HaKadosh Baruch Hu called out to Moshe. Even before he spoke, Vayedaber came later, but first he called out. One has to listen to the call. One has to be prepared. One has to have a proper frame of mind. One has to be ready. The Shem Yishmuel says that, in fact, the word Kadesh, as in Kadesh Urchatz, it doesn't say Kiddush. It says Kadesh. Why Kadesh? Because Kadesh comes from Hazmana. Prepare yourself. Get ready. Position yourself. It's going to buckle yourself in. It's going to be an incredible ride. What a special night we have in store. How do we do it? How do we recite these opening simanim? Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is quoted as saying, I think this is a very prevalent custom, which is to begin the night by reciting or singing all 15 steps of the simanim, and then to introduce each particular unit by announcing that siman once again. The Nitei Gavriel of Gavriel Tzimmer also quotes Yishlomar Kol Siman Seder Komo. You recite each one, introduce it in its place, and some say it all at the beginning and introduce the whole night in that way altogether. There is deeper meaning, though. We saw some sort of superficial reasons. We want to get it right. There's a lot of moving parts. We want to tap into Masorah. It's a night of tradition, and we begin by launching with a tradition. But I think there's some deeper readings that I want to share with you, and again, that will inform us about how we can organize ourselves. We can live with Seder, that we can achieve freedom even within these very restricted, constrictive lives that coronavirus has forced us to live within the confines of our own homes at this time. The Al-Sheikh, Rav Moshe Al-Sheikh, who lived in the 16th century Turkey, and then he moved to Israel, he says that the 15 simanim contain the derech. This is the pathway or the formula to genuine avodas Hashem. First, you have to be mekadesh yourself. And then you need to cleanse yourself, urchatz. And then he says this is a formula of 15 steps of how to perfect yourself, how to live your best self yet, all contained within these 15 steps. The Chidah, Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai, who lived in the 18th century, he says the simanim follow the order of the Aseres Adibros, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, embedded within this order, and the way we begin our night is by reminding ourselves of how we are bound by the 10 Commandments, which are 10 categories under which the entire Torah is subsumed. The Chassam Sofer has a different reason. The Imrei Noam has a different reason. The Simanim says the Imrei Noam follow the 15 kindnesses that Hashem did the Jewish people. In our experience of leaving Mitzrayim, in the redemptive process, when Hashem liberated us, there were 15 steps of those kindness, and those 15 steps on that journey towards freedom are reflected, they are relived in the formula of the 15 steps of the Simanim itself. The Yisod V'Shorosh Avoda, a very esoteric Kabbalistic work of Alexander Ziskind of Hardodna, and died in the year 1794. The Yisod V'Shorosh Avoda quotes the great Kabbalist, the Arizal, who says that they're different. These 15 steps represent the kavanah, the concentration that you're having for different names of God. But he concludes by suggesting, and I echo, that we not try it at home unless you are a Kabbalist and unless you are positioned to do so. Rav Biderman, Rav Melech Biderman, has a beautiful pshat. It's on page 13, source 17. We're moving quickly along. And Rav Biderman says the following. Listen to this beautiful, beautiful idea. He says that the Gemara tells us that Hamotze Aveda Chayiv Lachzir Lebalav Al Pi Simanim. If somebody loses an object, we have a responsibility, we have an obligation to return and restore the object to the rightful owner. And how do we identify? How do we confirm that the one who steps forward to claim it's their object, how do we ensure that in fact it belongs to them? So the Gemara tells us, our rabbis teach us, the halacha tells us, that they have to identify simanim, distinguished character traits. They have to tell us something special, the simanim, about the object, and that enables us to confirm they are the right owner. Says Rav Melech Biderman in his Agada, the Simone HaSeder, these signs, the symbols that we begin with, the list of 50 things, Kadesh, Ruach, Yachatz, these are the Simone that help us find our way back. We have lost so much in the year since last Seder. On Pesach, we gather, we're a family, we're friends, we're on a journey towards freedom. We tell our family narrative. We stand to get ready to stand at Sinai together. We live with this faith that Hashem, just as He redeemed us in the past, He will redeem us in the present and the future. And yet, over the course of this past year, so much has happened. We've lost so much of that passion, that energy, so much of that excitement and enthusiasm. And so how do we get back that which is lost? Simanim, identifying marks. That's what brings it back. The Ishbitz Rebbe, the Meshilach, says that's the idea of Leil Shimurim. The Torah calls Pesach night a Leil of Shimurim, a night of watching. And says the Ishbitz Rebbe, it means that the memories, the experiences, the feelings that we had that were fleeting, that were temporary and temporal, that we let go, Hashem has collected, He holds on to. Pesach night, we get them back. We revisit them. We tap into something within ourselves. We awaken. We turn on a light. We turn on a happiness and a joy and a faith and a hope within ourselves that perhaps was lost, but we're able to recover on Pesach night. So these are some of the deeper reasons which are offered for what the Seder is really all about. But now I want to come to the crux of what I want to speak to you about. It's the final suggestion of what the Seder is really all about. And the reason that we celebrate our freedom, not by saying it's a night off from Judaism, a night off from rules, a night off from regulations. Freedom, go party, do what you want. We do the opposite. We have incredible rules. You have to eat this measure, in this time, while leaning this way. You have to have clean this, kasher that. You have to follow this order, and you have to finish by this time. Instead of our marking freedom by letting go, moving on, dropping responsibility, we do the opposite. Our definition of freedom is highly regulated, highly regimented, highly organized, living a night of unparalleled order, a night of unparalleled discipline. How we eat, what we eat, when we eat, what measure we eat, what we say, to whom we say it, our posture while we say it, and so on. And that's not a coincidence. Because the theme I want to develop with you now and for the rest of our time together this evening, that the truth is you can only achieve freedom through discipline. Freedom is not through disorder. Freedom is not through letting go. Freedom is not when you're boundaryless and borderless. You achieve freedom through discipline. You achieve freedom through living a life of order. Tosfos references this, source 19, Osa Seder. He says, you take away the table, it's time to say the Haggadah, and it's time to make Seder. The night is called Leil HaSeder. We see that in our earliest sources. The night is about Seder. The Mechilta Darashbi, the Medrash tells us, in what merit were we redeemed? In what merit did we leave Egypt? Because we left with Seder, not with Mahuma. You know what Mahuma is? Mahuma is when you're running late to get to Halavai. We should all be able to get to airports and travel safely and securely. You're running late. This one didn't pack, and this one didn't get dressed, and this one didn't pack their sandwich, and this one's not ready, and this one forgot to call the Uber, and you're scrambling and running and trying to get there on time. That's Mahuma, when you're scattered and undisciplined, and therefore your entire no menuchas hanefesh, you have no peace of mind, you have no serenity. Your entire life is filled with anxiety and worry and concern. You sabotage your own success because it's with Mahuma. We didn't leave with Mahuma. We left with Seder. Hashem organized and He took us out. It was quickly, it was efficiently, it was b'chipazon, it was quickly, but it was with order. And it's in the merit of that order, and we relive that order, therefore, on Seder night. That is what the night is all about. The Sfas Emes writes in his Haggadah of Yehuda Aryeh Leib Alter of Ger in the 19th century. He says, Lachen leil Pesach shishas kulasam sheyisrael shebachuz miyisrael mekaban zareshis v'chol abriya chozeres lesidra u'dikuna nikra Seder. Says the Sfas Emes, God created the whole world with order, so we emulate Him with order. The 6 days of creation were not haphazard. They weren't scattered. They weren't random. Hashem had a specific order with which He did things. We recreate, we emulate a sense of order. If we want to create, and if we want to achieve, and if we want to live our best selves, if we want to be godly, if we want to be disciplined, it's the only way to achieve a sense of freedom. Simanim asa Torah. We have the notion of simana milsa on Rosh Hashanah, the idea of simanim, they have value. Rav Soloveitchik also echoes the same idea. In his book Festival of Freedom, a collection of Rav Soloveitchik's thoughts and insights on Pesach, he points out that the Rambam, Maimonides, in a very unusual way, both in the laws of Pesach and the laws of Yom Kippur, uses this term. The Rambam writes, Sidr asiyas mitzvos elu belel chamish asar kachu. The order to perform these mitzvos on Pesach is as follows. And then again later, when it comes to the laws of Yom Kippur, he writes, Seder kol hamasim shedom zekachu. Here's the order. And in both places, it says the Rav, Pesach and Yom Kippur are introduced with Seder Asiyah, Seder Kol HaMasim. Here's the order, here's the organization, here's what you need to do. Why did the Rambam put that in? Why didn't you just tell us this? Why does he add that word? Says Rabbi Soloveitchik, the things must remain in their proper place in the overall structure of the mitzvah. It has to be a Seder in order to achieve the holiness of what Yom Kippur is, in order to achieve the freedom and transformation of what Pesach is. These 2 days, maybe even more than any other, have to be defined by a healthy sense of order, by a sense of Seder, of discipline, of rules, of regiment, living with a life of order. How do we achieve that? Order is freedom. Order is freedom, and we all know that. The more disciplined we are, the more freedom we achieve. The more reckless, the more carefree, the more that we shirk off responsibilities, and the more less punctual we are, and the less we're supervising our finances, we don't achieve freedom in that way. It's the exact opposite. We destroy ourselves, and we undermine, we self-sabotage. It's very interesting that the holiday is not called by the name that the Torah calls it, Chag HaMatzos or Chag HaAviv, but rather we refer to it, again, almost universally, certainly in our davening, but even colloquially, we call it Zman Cheruseinu. In our davening, we acknowledge, V'sita lanu es Hashem Elokeinu b'yahava, mo'adin l'simcha, and so on, as Yom Chag HaMatzos, as Zman Cheruseinu. It's a time of what? Freedom. In the Haggadah, we hope and we pray, Hashat Hacha, right now we're here, Hashat Abdi, we're slaves, but L'shana Haba, we long to be B'nei Chorin. We long to be free. We recall in the Haggadah, Lefichach, because of this journey you took us on, God, Chayavim Lahodos, we're obligated to thank you. Why? Hotzianu, you took us me'avdos l'cheirus, from servitude and bondage to a life of cheirus, to a life of freedom. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us that lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. You can't finish all the work, you can't finish everything. But lo ata ben chorin libatal mimena. But you're not free in order to be able to walk away either. This cheruseinu, zman cheruseinu, b'nei chorin, me'avdos l'cheirus, ben chorin, how do we define this freedom? The night is all about freedom. The holiday is all about freedom. We call it a time of our freedom. That's what it's all about. How do you define freedom? What in fact is freedom? So the Gemara in Shabbos tells us, "B'meisim chavshi, kevan shemeis adam nasa chavshi min haTorah u'min mitzvos." You really want to be free is only when a person leaves this world. When a person's soul is extracted from their body, when we die, we're no longer obligated or bound by Torah or mitzvos. That's a certain sense of a freedom. So what is cheirus, and why is it in the present tense that we're now going out? It's man cheirusenu, right now we're freeing ourselves. And the answer is, too many of us, most of us, are slaves to our livelihood, to our material possessions, to our obligations, to fashion, to culture, to pop culture. We are avadim to avadim. The world tells us we have to keep up with our neighbor. The world tells us how we have to fit in, what we have to listen to, what we have to watch, what we have to wear, when we're able to, where we have to go, what we have to own, how we have to appear. We are slaves, we are enslaved, we are bound and in bondage to this world. We are slaves to slave. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has a poem, the great poet Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the author of the Kuzari. He writes, Avdei Zman, Avdei Avadim Hem. Servants on time are servants of servants. The servants of God alone is free. Whenever a human seeks a share, my share is God, says my soul. Comes across a lot better in the original, in the Hebrew. But what Rav Yehuda Halevi is describing is that if you're not punctual, you don't control your own time. If you're always frazzled and you're always running out of time, and you're always running late, and you're not punctual and you're not organized, you're not free. You're enslaved to your procrastination, to your laziness. Ein lecha ben chorin ella. A person is only free when a person accepts upon themselves a sense of Torah. And here's how I want to express this to you. There was a philosopher and political theorist named Efrem, and source 32, if you're looking inside the source sheets on page 18, he wrote a book called Escape from Freedom, a very interesting individual. And he lived 1900 to 1980. And in this book, Escape from Freedom, it sounds paradoxical. Why would you have to escape from freedom? Isn't freedom exactly what we want? Why are you running away from it? Where are you going? And he says in Escape from Freedom, he distinguishes between what he calls freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from is the negative form. If a person is enslaved, a person is a prisoner. If a person is in Siberia, a person is, God forbid, being held hostage. a person is physically in bondage, physically enslaved. They are seeking freedom from something. That's one form of a freedom. It's the negative form of a freedom. It's freedom from. But it describes that there's a second type of a freedom. And this is the freedom of what Pesach is all about. It's the freedom of what Torah, of what Judaism is all about. It's not freedom from, it's what he calls a freedom to. We're not trying to get away from bondage. The story of Pesach is not just getting out from under the Egyptians, but rather it's the story of the lifestyle that we want to lead. It's about where we're going to. It's about how to realize our best selves. Who are you meant to be? What is your mission? What is the difference you're meant to make to this world? Who is our people? What is our role? Is the world better because there's a Jewish people? It's not about the freedom from. It's true, the Egyptians enslaved us. They held us captive. We were prisoners to them, but we were set free. That's freedom from. But now with that freedom, what do we do with it? Where are we going? What will we achieve? What is the freedom to? That's what the night is really all about. The freedom from is ridding oneself of duties and obligations. And it produces, he says, a monotonous existence of boredom and aimlessness, and sometimes even depression. It can lead to a life of addiction to fill that vacuum of licentiousness or criminal acts of depravity. That's freedom from. Because if you were defined by having been enslaved, if you were a prisoner and now you're set free, how do you fill that vacuum? How do you fill that void? How do you now identify? How do you now define who you are? We can't be limited by the definition of freedom from, but rather what Pesach is all about is defining our journey, not of freedom from, but our journey of freedom to where we want to go and who we want to be, what our life should really be all about. It's very interesting historically. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, Zatzal, he suggested that when we sing Hatikva, the national anthem of Israel, of the Jewish people in modern times, that rather than sing Liot Am Chavshi means to be a people who are free. That's a freedom from. Israel is not just about running away from. It's not just about anti-Semites. It's not about our enemies and adversaries. It's not just about those who sought to exterminate us, and therefore we're celebrating we have a land of Israel, a modern state of Israel. It is Liot Am Chashi. We want to be free from persecution. He suggested replacing it and singing it, Liot Am Kodesh Be'artzenu. Not a freedom from, he didn't formulate it based on this philosopher, but not a freedom from Liot Am Chashi, but Liot Am Kadosh Be'artzenu. A freedom to, where are we going and who do we want to be and what shapes the lives that we want to live. You know, for too many people, discipline is a bad word, is a dirty word. It makes us think discipline of what we have to sacrifice, of what we have to give up. It makes us think about restriction or boredom or rigidity. Discipline lacks any, you can't be extemporaneous and you can't simply go and have fun and you can't simply, but rather it takes all the fun out of life. For too many people, discipline is a bad word. But the truth is that self-discipline is in itself the form of freedom. It's freedom from laziness and lethargy, freedom from the expectation and demands, freedom from having to keep up and meet the expectations of others. It's freedom from weakness and fear and freedom from doubt when you live a life of discipline. I want to share with you on page 19, I've become a big fan of both his writings and his podcast, Jocko Willink. Jocko Willink, some of you have heard me quote him before. In the previous Shabbos ago, the drasha, it was based on a book that he's written called Extreme Ownership, what we call Achrayas. There's an incredible amount of Torah. We didn't need Jocko Willink to teach the Jewish people. Since Adam and Chava failed to take ownership for their mistake, and Cain didn't take ownership for his killing Hevel, and all the way until today, our failure to own our mistakes and our shortcomings, our failure to own our destiny and our role in shaping it. His book is so powerful, called Extreme Ownership. But this is a different book that he wrote afterwards, called Discipline Equals Freedom, Field Manual. Who is Jocko Willink? He was a Navy SEAL for 20 years. He rose through the ranks to become a commander of Task Unit Bruiser, the most decorated special operations unit of the Iraq War. And he took his experiences and his lessons from being a Navy SEAL to talk about not only how to succeed at war and in battles, but how to succeed in life. And I highly recommend his book, or even just a summary in an article of it. I have for you in the source sheets, and you can look there. Listen to what he says. While discipline and freedom seem like they sit on opposite sides of the spectrum, they are actually very connected. Freedom is what everyone wants, to be able to act and live with freedom. But the only way to get to a place of freedom is through discipline. If you want financial freedom, you have to have financial discipline. If you want more free time, you have to follow a more disciplined time management system. You also have to have the discipline to say no. No to things that eat up your time and no payback, like random YouTube videos, clickbait on the internet, even events that you agree to attend when you know you don't want to be there. Discipline equals freedom applies to every aspect of life. If you want more freedom, get more discipline. Freedom in your health, be more disciplined in your lifestyle. Freedom with your time, own your time and take care of it and manage it better. Freedom with your finances, be more responsible. Take greater achrayus with your finances. Discipline equals freedom, not the opposite. Discipline doesn't equal slavery, and being undisciplined is not freedom. You can only fully realize freedom when we live a life in which we are disciplined. He writes, that's the real message. If you want to transform your life in a positive way, that transformation will not happen by itself. You need to make it happen. You need to do the work. You need to put in the hours, the days, the weeks, the months, the years. You need to get on a path and stay on the path that leads to the positive transformations, the path that leads to a better you, the path that leads to freedom. And that path is the hard path. It is the tough path. It is the relentless path. It is the path of discipline. And the path of discipline is the only way. Discipline equals freedom. This is what Pesach is really all about. Why are we launching the night of freedom with Seder? Because we need to understand that freedom comes responsibility, freedom comes opportunity and blessing, but it will only be realized when we live lives that are disciplined and regulated. When we are in control, then we have dignity, then we have sovereignty, then in fact we are godly. When we're undisciplined, we're always running late, and our home is a pigsty, and we never fulfill our goals, and we never show up on time, and we never follow through on our word, and our life is in disarray and undisciplined and disorganized. We in fact don't have any freedom. We don't have freedom to think. We don't have freedom of the mind. We don't have freedom of the heart. We have no peace of mind. Freedom is discipline. When we're disciplined, we find that freedom that we crave. Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, writes, greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness, it turns out, is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline. And my friends, as we're going through these extraordinary times right now, in which our entire schedule has been turned on its head, our lives are entirely upside down. We're totally outside of our normal routine. We're confined to our homes, our whole family. These are on their devices doing schoolwork. This is trying to do work to bring in an income to pay the bills. We're trying to manage it with a sense of emotional, spiritual balance and spend quality time with one another. How do we do it? We'll never find freedom within the confines of our home if we're undisciplined. Greatness is not a function of circumstance. If you can only achieve greatness when everything is in its right place, if we can only be great when everything is great, when everyone's cooperating and the world is cooperating and our health is cooperating and the viruses are cooperating, if the only way we can achieve greatness is when the circumstance is great, then we're not really great. Greatness is a matter of conscious choice and discipline. It's going to sleep every night with a schedule of how you're going to make the most of the next day, given the circumstances, taking extreme ownership. Okay, I can't control these variables. I can't control what has to happen. I can't control the limitations. I can't control what's going on necessarily. But now with those variables, with those circumstances, with that reality I now have, how do I take extreme ownership to manage it, to plan for it, and to remain disciplined in my execution of it? With my children, with my own schedule, with my routine, my davening, my learning, my exercise, my health, my lifestyle, my communication, my quality time with my spouse. Because our attitude and our ability to do that says everything about who we are, says everything about who we will be. If we can do it in these circumstances, imagine what can accomplish the freedom of discipline that we will have when things, please God, quickly turn around. This is, in fact, what makes us uniquely human. It makes us different than animals. You know, if you're looking inside executive function, what we call executive function are the last to develop in a maturing brain. And while they infiltrate across different domains of functioning, they're sourced in the prefrontal lobes, which separate man from beast. Essentially, an animal has an impulse. An animal has an instinct. An animal does what it wants, when it wants, where it wants, with whom it wants. An animal has no discipline. It has an animal voice, an animal instinct, an animal desire. And that's why we describe somebody whose room is a mess is a pigsty. Someone who's stuffing their face is eating like a pig, is acting like an animal, because an animal is the epitome of the undisciplined. Well, this is true anatomically. The prefrontal lobes, which separate man from animal, where we have executive function. Being disciplined is what differentiates you. It's what makes you a human being. So do we want to be an animal, or do we want to be a Tzelem Elokim? Do we want to be a human being? Do we want to give in to the lowest version of ourselves, or do we want to live the highest version of ourselves? Living with Seder, with order, organization, regulated. That helps us achieve. But it's so much more than that. And this is the last part of the message I want to share with you tonight. And that is, living with order is not just Jocko Willink. It's not how Navy SEALs get through. It's not just from a position of a motivational speaker how we can live our best selves and live our best lives and find the greatest happiness and serenity and accomplish the most. My friends, you need to know that living with order and organization, living with Seder, not just on Seder night, but throughout the year, has a religious value, has religious meaning, is an expression of religion in itself. And let me show you how. Source 37, page 23, if you're following inside the Medrash Shmos Rabbah. Amar bichama mi she'eno raga lasos talmudo sedarim uboe shenemar tzalmaves velo sedarim. A person needs to be organized in your learning. If you don't have a schedule, a curriculum, if you don't have a timeline, if you don't have a system of review, if you're not organized in your learning, you will never achieve what you could. You'll never become the person you were meant to be, says the Medrash. The Gemara Chulin, Amalei Man Reish Sidra Bebavel. We describe the very name, the appellation of the person who is the head of the Jewish community in Babylonia. How were they defined in Talmudic times? Their name, their title was the Reish Sidra, the person who is the most organized, the person who has the greatest Seder, the Reish Sidra, the person who has the greatest proficiency in being organized, in being punctual, in valuing their time and their order. Bring in the shulchan, the table in the tabernacle, the Mishkan, v'arachta eser and lay out its value. The Targum Onkelos translate this as the Sa'el Yas Psora, the Tazder Yas Sidra. You know when we have value? When we have Seder. If you're organized with your time, you value your time. If you take care of your possessions and you're careful with them, you value your possessions. If you take care of yourself, your health, your wellness, your exercise, your lifestyle, then you value your body. And if you value your words, you're careful and organized with how you use them. Rav Avram Pam, the great Rosh Hashiva, used to stress that a person needs to be thoughtful with how they speak. Don't waste words. There was a time when yeshivish people would say, whatchamacallit. They would stumble on their words. They didn't really think through what they were going to say before they said it. And they'd say, whatchamacallit. And Rav Pam absolutely hated, he rejected, he wanted to remove whatchamacallit from your vocabulary. That lacks Seder. Be thoughtful, be organized, communicate articulately, know what you're going to say before you say it, because that's how you show you value your words. You value your words, you're organized with your words. You value your time, you're organized with your time. If you value your possessions, you're organized in how you treat your possessions. If you value your body, you're organized with our attitude of our body. It's the very language that we use. We ask someone, are you beseder? Is everything beseder in your life? Is everything beseder means, is everything organized? Is everything disciplined? Is everything in its place? Do you have peace of mind? The Das Torah of Yochum Levovitz, and his Das Torah writes about his Rebbe, the Alter of Kelm. The Alter of Kelm excelled in this arena of living with order, of being organized and disciplined, of being punctual, of being on top of our lives and thereby achieving freedom. He lived it to the extreme. He writes in Das Torah that the Alter of Kelm said, if a Talmud in the yeshiva, if a student would sit back, this is one of my pet peeves, I ask my children, when you get up from a table, when you get up from a desk, when you get up and you pull a chair out, put the chair back. For the Alter of Kelm, if you don't put the chair back, he writes, it's like violating Shabbos. It's Chilul Shabbos. Chilul Shabbos. You get up from a chair, you put it back, organized, in order, in the slot, where it was. It's a menschlich thing to do. It's how we live our lives. If we're sloppy in our conduct and our behavior, then we're sloppy in who we are, sloppy in our souls, and sloppy in our kishkas. For the Alter of Kelm, he writes, the Alter of Kelm was, his clothing lasted forever because he was so careful and organized and disciplined in how he treated it. When he put on his hat, it wasn't tilted this way or this way. He lived with a sense of order and dignity and discipline in his appearance, with his possessions, with his things, with the reputation that he gave through his appearance. The Alter was careful with his time. He records, the Das Torah of Yochum Levovitz, that the Alter of Kelm, if he was supposed to learn until 5 p.m., and at 5 p.m. he was in between the words Amar and Rava, he would stop at Amar and not finish Rava. He was so disciplined with his time. He did what he did when he was meant to do it, according to the commitment he made, not only to others, because we only respect others if we respect their time and follow through on our word to them, and we're punctual. If we say you're going to meet them, be there when you say you're going to meet them. You're going to return them or call at that time, call at that time. But we also violate our own sense of integrity. We violate who we are if we're undisciplined, unregulated, if we're not respectful of our own time. Why was the author of Kelm so obsessed with order? Was he neurotic? Did he have OCD? Was it diagnosed? Where did it come from? So Rav Yerucham Levovitz writes that for the author of Kelm, gave the example of a pearl necklace. What is the most valuable part of a pearl necklace? Of course, it's pearls. The string that runs through the pearls is negligible. The string that runs through the pearls is almost worthless. It has practically no value at all. And yet, the string is the most important part of the necklace. Because if that string snaps, you have no pearls. They break, they run on the floor, they go everywhere. Says the author of Kelm, Seder, order, discipline, being organized, being punctual. We don't worship it as an ends. It's a means to achieve the things that are really important, that really matter. Our relationship, our learning, our davening, our chesed, the people we care about, our experiences, ourselves. All of that is what matters. Being hyper-organized and punctual is not something that we worship as an ends. It is the means to achieve the best of who we're meant to be in all these other areas of our life. It's the string that holds the pearls of our life together so they don't snap and go everywhere. The story is told of the author of Kelm, who came to visit his son in the Volozhin Yeshiva. He wanted to see how his son was doing. But he didn't go to the Beis Medrash to check in on his son. He went straight to the dormitory. And when he saw that his son's shoes were lined up and the clothing was folded and the bed was made, he didn't even bother going to the Beis Medrash. He went home because he knew that if his dormitory room was clean, if his dormitory room was organized, then he was organized. In his learning and in his life, it was all that he needed to see. Rav Dessler writes, this is the theme behind the flags. The Jewish people encamped in the wilderness, in the desert, under logos and emblems in an exact order, because that order mattered. Not only is it true individually, but it's true collectively. We as a people, we as a nation, can achieve our most. When? When we're organized by logo, by flag, by encampment, when we are able to identify where we are at. Rav Volba, the Alei Shor, has a long essay about how to live a life of Seder, of why it matters in achieving our best sense of selves. Because if we're organized with our things and we're organized with our time, we'll be organized in our thinking and organized in our feeling. We'll achieve our best lives, our best sense of selves yet. The Maharal of Prague, says that Torah is the Seder of the world. The world needs order. It needs a blueprint. It needs a formula. It needs a manual. The Torah is our access to the order of the whole world. The Gemara in Sota and Daf Mem Tes tells us something. Amai kamakayim, the whole world. In what merit does the world exist? What sustains and holds up the world? And the Gemara answers, a kedusha de sidra, which we know means the kedusha at the end of davening, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. But says the Gemara, you know in what merit the world stands? Kedusha de sidra, the holiness of being organized, the holiness of being disciplined. With discipline and order come freedom. If a lack of discipline, you don't have freedom, your life is a mess, and your relationships are a mess, your finances are a mess, your time is a mess, and your health is a mess. You know, we have Shmona Shratzim. There are 8 creepy crawly, 8 insects or bugs which convey tumah. They contaminate and convey impurity. Rav Melech Biderman says, you know, the Shmona Shratzim, you know why Shratzim, the sheretz, conveys tumah? That word Shratzim, sheratzim. Sheretz, sheratz. It's running. If you're running, scrambling, always running late, always catching up, always trying to figure it out, always trying to save the day, because you simply were unorganized. You were undisciplined. You weren't punctual. You weren't thought out. Then it conveys tumah. That is exactly what contaminates our lives with a sense of impurity. The Baal Shem Tov said, we read it in Shema, Va'avarta mehira me'al ha'aretz ha'tova, which simply is translated to mean will be destroyed quickly from this world. But the Baal Shem Tov said, perhaps read it differently. Va'avartem, you know what is your life? You know what undermines your peace of mind and your serenity? Va'avartem, you know what makes you forced to be lost? Mehira, when you're always running, when you're always rushing, when you're always behind, when you're always trying to catch up. My dear friends, particularly in these times in which our world have been turned upside down, in which our routines have been broken, in which we have no benefit or luxury of the way it always was. Now more than ever, we need that sense of Seder, the freedom that comes through discipline. if you want to not kill someone in your home during the time of quarantine and social distancing, if you want to survive and not only get through the day, but be proud of the day you had, then you need to go into the day with a sense of Seder. What's our schedule? Who goes where? How are we organized? How do we build in breaks? How do we build in activity? How do we build in margin and space? How do we build in personal space? What is the extreme ownership to live the discipline that will give us the freedom even within this very restricting circumstance? The Nitei Gavriel of Gavriel's dinner quotes source 48. There's a minhag. A mitzvah boy gets a watch at his bar mitzvah, he quotes. Where does this come from? Shekain minhag Morocco. It comes from Morocco. And he says, now that you're a bar mitzvah, you know what it means to be a gadol? A child. An immature child squanders and wastes time. An immature child disciplined in their eating and in their speaking and in their time and in their room and with their things. To be an adult, to be a gadol, is to be disciplined. And so we express this by getting the gift of a bar mitzvah boy, a bat mitzvah girl. We buy them a watch so they know that time is the most valuable commodity that we have. It's meant to be watched over. It's meant to be cared for. It's meant to be lived for its fullest. The Imrei Emes had a different tradition. The Imrei Emes said, we get a chassan. When somebody gets married, we buy them a watch, a gold watch. Why a gold watch, said the Imrei Emes, the Ger Rebbe? Because to tell them that time is golden. Time is gold. It's the most precious commodity we have. I saw in a beautiful sefer, Kol Yemei Chayecha. We get the chassan the watch. Why? To tell the chassan, you're at work, or you're still at yeshiva learning, you're at the kollel. When your watch strikes the time you told your wife you're going to be home, be home. Because from that moment that you told her you're going to be home, she's waiting for you. And the same is true for a woman towards a man. When we make a commitment or a promise, when we say we'll be home at that time, we'll call at that time, we'll check in at that time, and we don't, we've injured the other party. Our lack of discipline, our lack of order or control in managing our time hurts people. So we buy a chassan a watch to say, you now have a responsibility not only in your own time, but in your time towards others. Be disciplined with it. The story is told of the Alter of Kelmer Simcha Zissel, that he once had a chavrusa who came late, and when the chavrusa sat down, he saw the chavrusa wasn't wearing a watch, and he was astonished. He said to the chavrusa, how could it be a human being lives and operates in this world without a watch? How could you live without a watch? You need to know and be conscious and mindful of time at all times, because every moment is irreplaceable. It's the most precious commodity that we have. That's why time is freedom. Our attitude towards time is what freedom is really entirely all about. Torah tells us the very first mitzvah that we're given when we come out of Egypt. We're a free people. We've broken free from the prison of Egypt. And what's the first mitzvah we have? HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim. Manage the calendar, sanctify the new moon, and manage time. Says the Sforno. You know why? Because the defining characteristic of a slave is they don't control their own time. If you binge watch mindless narishkeit deep into the night, which therefore depletes you of the sleep so that you're not healthy, which therefore does not leave you at the top of your game for your family and for the work who's paying you. If you're undisciplined, you're not free. If you're owned by Netflix culture, pop culture, if you're owned by going into debt to keep up, to buy things you can't afford, if you're undisciplined with your time, with your money, then in fact you're enslaved, you're not free at all. So says the Sforno, the very first mitzvah the Jewish people were given when we came into the wilderness was control the calendar, sanctify the new moon. Why? Because freedom is in time management. When you control your time, when you're disciplined your time, that is freedom. The Medrash Shmuel writes on Avos, Ein aveda ka'avedas hazman. There is nothing lost. There's nothing as squandered as losing or wasting time that we have. There are 86,400 seconds in every day. Imagine you woke up every morning and someone put in your bank account $86,400. It's a nice image. Imagine it for a moment. But here's the caveat. They told you have to spend it by the end of the day. $86,400, it's gone at the end of the day. So spend it, use it, or lose it. We'd all rush to spend the $86,400 well. And yet there's 86,400 seconds at the beginning of every day. And we either use it or we lose it. And yet too many of us, we choose on purpose to forfeit, to concede. We squander it instead of using it to its fullest. In order to get the most out of life and to give the most to life, we waste it and we squander it and we hurt ourselves. You know, it's a tragedy. Time is the most precious commodity we have. It doesn't matter how rich or how poor, how young or how old, how healthy or how unfit. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. We all have the same 168 hours in a week. We all have the same 86,400 seconds in a day. There's nothing you can do to have more of it. There's no way to increase it. There's no way to expand it. We all have the same amount of time. And therefore, if you work harder, in theory, you could get more money. And maybe if you take better care of yourself, you could live longer. But there's nothing you can do to add more time to any day. It's the most precious commodity we have. If we waste it, you can't recover it. You can't get it back. So it's a tragedy. Why should it be that if you look online at the Urban Dictionary, a website that's dedicated to modern phrases, it defines Jewish time as follows: not perfectly on time, possibly somewhat late, but no harm is done as a result. The implication is there's no need to be exactly on time, and that starting a little late is acceptable. The time comes from Jewish culture, which is often relaxed about punctuality. That is the secular world's understanding about our attitude towards time. We invented HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. The very first mitzvah of all the mitzvahs we have emphasizes for us that discipline is freedom when it comes to time, the responsibility to manage our time, the awesome, invaluable commodity of time. And yet, the secular world's understanding, the Urban Dictionary's definition of Jewish time, is that Jews are relaxed about punctuality. The class will start Jewish time. The simcha starting Jewish time. I'll meet you there, Jewish time. It's a horrific indictment of us. It's a terrible statement about us. We, more than anyone, should be modeling for the world that freedom comes through discipline, that we value our time and we want to make the most of it. It doesn't mean you have to be a type A personality every moment of your day. Build into your time rest and relaxation, entertainment, but do it with a sense of mindfulness. Do it with intentionality. Do it because it's how you're choosing to spend your time, not because you're lazy or procrastinating or wasting it. 210 years as slaves in Egypt, we had no control over our time. And the very symbol of our freedom is this mitzvah, that we can control our time. Time awareness is at the core of humanity. It is the very responsibility of freedom. And so being relaxed about punctuality or running late, having a casual attitude towards start times, it's not Jewish time. It's exactly the opposite. It's the antithesis of the Jewish notion of time. Wasting time, bittul zman, is tantamount to burning money. And killing time is an act of murder. There was an article in Forbes a couple of years ago called 5 minutes early is on time. On time is late. Late is unacceptable. And the author shows how disrespectful and inefficient and self-centered it is to always run late. It's disrespectful to other people. It's inconsiderate of those who are there waiting for you. It's a waste of time from the things that you could be doing. It's unprofitable. It's disorganized. Your calendar, you can't achieve what you're meant to achieve. Everyone likes to equate business with importance, but having a perpetually hectic schedule signals that you can't prioritize and that you're undisciplined, that you're flaky, that you're an egomaniac, and you think your time is more valuable than other people. Paying attention to punctuality is not about being judgy or stressed. It's the opposite. It makes room for the caring, considerate, thoughtful people I want in my life, friends or colleagues, he writes. And so therefore, 5 minutes early is on time. On time is late. Late is unacceptable. That should be the Jewish definition of time, because living with Seder is freedom. Living with discipline and order is how we define our very selves. It's how we achieve the freedom that we want. It's why we're getting rid of the chametz in our lives. Why are we so obsessed? And this year it's unusual. We're trying to figure out perhaps certain leniencies to rely on. But why are we on the search and destroy mission? Why is chametz arch enemy number one that we're trying to get rid of this adversary? The Gemara in Brachos, Daf Yud Zayin tells us that really, Ribona Olam and Galav Yadil Lefanecha Shiritzonenu Lasos Ritzonecha, Almighty God, we want to do your will. We want to do everything you want. Umima Akev, what gets in the way? Sa'or Shebe'isa, the yeast in the dough, the Yetzer Hara, this inflated sense of self. Chametz, you know the only difference in the world between matzah and chametz? Same ingredients, flour and water. There's only one difference: time. When you let the flour and water sit, when you're lazy and procrastinate, when they get inflated, that is chametz. And therefore, that is our enemy. We get rid of it. We instead define ourselves with a sense and attitude of matzah. We act with alacrity and zeal, with enthusiasm, with discipline. And through that, we achieve a certain sense of time. It's how we find time in our lives. It's what our lives are really all about. It's what we're meant to be. You want freedom in your life, even while we're restricted to our homes. And even while this virus takes away so much of our liberty, we nevertheless still find freedom if we are disciplined, if we have plans, if we control our attitude towards our things, towards ourselves, towards our words, towards our emotions, towards our time. We are thermostats, not thermometers. A thermometer tells you your temperature. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm fearful. A thermostat lets us control it. When you live with order, when you live with Seder, you're a thermostat, not a thermometer. Every one of us can be. We don't have to look at the conditions that we're in and simply be the result of them, but never forfeit the choice that we make and the control we have over ourselves, to take extreme ownership, to live with order and discipline, and through that, to live with a sense of freedom. So the way we achieve freedom is living with greater Seder. We get rid of that chametz in our lives, the procrastination. And we begin the Seder by singing this agenda, by proclaiming that we understand that the responsibility of freedom and the opportunity and invitation of freedom is to live with Seder and Simanim, is to have an agenda and to follow through on it and to get to the end of it. My dearest friends, let's leave Mitzrayim together. Let's leave those borders and boundaries that are holding us back, like our poor time management and our poor planning and our poor execution and our poor discipline. Let's achieve the freedom that like we've never felt before, to adopt a level of discipline that we've never had before, to realize our best selves in the way we take care of ourselves, in the relationships we have with others, in our goals and ideals, in what we want to achieve, in who we can be. If we live with Seder, we'll find that freedom to live our best selves yet. Thank you so much for joining. Wishing everyone a Chag Kasher V'Sameach.